Hello everyone, I'm Naveen Agarwal. If you're doing risk management for medical devices, you have probably come across a question like this. Do I have to show pre-mitigation and post-mitigation risk levels in my risk assessments for a product that is already in the field and risk controls have already been implemented? How do I show pre-mitigation risk levels? Or I have a medical device, maybe a capital equipment, that has already reached its end-of-life service. What obligations do I have as a manufacturer for ongoing risk management of a device like that? These are very common questions that we come across in our industry. And the good news is the interactive Q&A session we just had, we discussed these questions with experts from the industry, and you're going to be able to watch a recording of this session in this video. So I invite you to take a look and share your perspective and experience in this area or any other related question. Make sure that you stay in touch with us because we do these sessions every month and you can join these sessions anytime. It's very informal and very casual, and we just get together with industry professionals and have a conversation about questions like these. So take a look. I invite you to join us next time. Anybody has a piece of news that came along that caught their eye that they would like to share and get started with? And I also have some interesting stuff to share with you that we can start our conversation with. So I open the floor if anybody wants to kind of just raise a question if they have, they want to discuss, or a piece of news that they want to review with everybody. I have a good discussion there.
So Naveen, Tom, I'll jump in here and just not today, but perhaps a future session, again, since it is first for me, something you might, for consideration to put in the queue, if there is interest at the team level, group level, or from folks out there as well. But I'd be interested in just, again, from my perspective, but how each of these businesses addresses lessons learned, knowledge sharing in general. Is there a program? And I'm certainly willing to share my journey, good, better, and different, for the last 15 years or so at Medtronic and a little previous with military and whatnot. But maybe put that in a queue for a future session if there's any interest there.
I think that could be a theme, like a thematic topic for one of our conversations. Hey, bring a few lessons learned that you can share with everybody. Yes, absolutely.
And institutionally, how they establish a program, if there is a program, at different levels, groups, et cetera. So,
got it. Well, thanks for the suggestion.
And Naveen, if I may add one more.
Sure.
I recently at work, we've been having some discussions on the value of measuring risk before implementing risk controls. So your pre-mitigation, post-mitigation, especially in light of the new requirement, not necessarily the new requirements, but the heavier focus on reducing risk as far as possible. Mm-hmm. So what value pre-mitigation, post-mitigation bring? Is that really necessary to do when all the focus should be on AFAP, reduce risk as well? So again, not for today, but for
I think this is a great question, Ronak, and we can get started with that, because what I'm hearing you say is, do we have to show pre-mitigation risk? I mean, let's take a legacy product, right? And you are creating documentation for that. You already have the product in the market. Controls have already been implemented. Do you have to show pre-mitigation risk, imagining there are no controls and imagining these risk levels just for the purpose of documentation? So I actually would like to bring that up for discussion for the team as to how you guys feel, because then we are just, making paperwork. That's how I feel. You already have a product, and figure out what pre-mitigation might mean to you in that case, right? So again, I would open up anybody who wants to share their perspective, and let's have a discussion on that.
I can say something on that one.
Sure, yeah. Go ahead, Bijan.
It's funny that this question was asked of me just yesterday within Medtronic.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just answered. I'll say the same thing I said to them. The question of pre and post mitigation risk is I think a historical throwback from years past when people used to use just FMEAs for risk management. As you said, Naveen, it is a meaningless question because ultimately what matters to the patient is the risk of the product when it leaves the factory, which is the post mitigation. So why does it matter to have pre-mitigation? I'll say two things about that. One of them is the investigators or reviewers want to know how much can they value your mitigations. That's really, I think, the reason they go back to it. So they say you put in this particular feature in your device. I want to know how much value is this adding. That's, I think, the reason they ask. But sometimes this question is really not answerable. An example I can give you is imagine you're using an implantable device that is built from biocompatible materials. Let's say you're using titanium. Well, because you've been building products for years, you know this is the right thing to do. So you start with a biocompatible material. To answer the question of pre-mitigation means that you have to now imagine a non-biocompatible material. Then the question will be, well, there are an array of toxic materials. Which one do you want me to consider? I mean, I can use uranium, copper, nickel, lead. What do you want me to consider to give you the pre? And what value does that give you? It really doesn't give any value. So I typically, the way at least I teach, and also I have it in my book, I have only the post. And the way I teach my students, I say, if the question is asked of you, have a sequence of revisions of your risk management file. So let's say if you started now, and this is your first version, and you have a certain amount of risk that you have estimated, then you go through a few months of development and you make some additional changes. Now you have lowered your risk. If the reviewer or auditor is asking you what's pre, you can say, let's go to version 1. Then we can go to version 1.1 and 1.2. You can see the sequence of risk reduction. So my pre is my version 1, the post is my version, say, 10, wherever I am.
I see that's a great suggestion. Ronak, how does that sound to you?
I agree. I think there is value in showing continuous improvement, especially when you're evolving your design through product development, or maybe even in post-market when you've gotten some signals from your field and you want to show that your Gen 2, Gen 3 is better than the previous generations and more safer for the patients. I do want to add, though, that the point that, Bijan, you brought up, how do you estimate the baseline initial risk? Do you assume the sky is falling, we haven't had any risk controls? Initially does not seem to add that input.
No.
And the last that is, I think historically, where this seemed to be value add was when the previous versions of 14971, which actually even the existing version, but it allowed for the workflow to establish a initial risk with no risk controls or limited risk controls, and allowed you to evaluate and see if you wanted to accept the risk. But all of that changed when the requirement came in to reduce risk as far as possible, regardless of what the initial risk was. So which is why I'm still of the opinion that maybe there is some value in the post-market and product development, but really from a regulation perspective, I don't think there should be a mandatory requirement.
Bijan, go ahead. You were trying to say something.
Post-market must be connected to pre-market. So as you learn more from the product's performance in the field, you bring that knowledge back into your device and maybe update your design, improve your safety. So then you can always say, well, we started from our maybe first version or maybe even the release version, and now we are 2 years in the market, we have improved our product. You can consider the post where we are now and the pre's when we first released it. You're just showing a sequence of improvements. And then you mentioned about reducing risk as far as possible. Remember that the MDR says as long as you don't adversely affect the product benefits. So
correct. And also, what I would say, this is great conversation, and I will share with you my experience where I helped a client remediate their risk files. So remediation means like they already had some stuff, product has been in the market for 10, 15, 20 years. And we didn't use the terminology pre-mitigation, post-mitigation at all. We said, initial and final, right? Or initial or post mitigation, whatever you want to say. And we said that you demonstrate as far as possible by showing that your risk controls, which are already implemented for these products, are state of art. So we are saying that all these risk controls, they are consistent and they conform with state of art expectations. So the post-market data supports our current risk estimation and risk evaluation. So our initial rating itself is going to be what we believe is what you might consider post mitigation. This is what, and there'll be no change in the columns in the worksheet. The values or the ranks will not change at all. They'll be just transposed. Now, through post-market for a legacy product, if you come across a new hazard or a hazardous situation or a new risk item, absolutely, you have to go in and show pre-mitigation and post-mitigation. So give you an example where they were getting a lot of complaints from customers about a certain feature of the product, and they decided to do a CAPA around that, and they did improvement, and as a result, new controls came up. So in the same risk assessment document, 80% of it is same as before, but the remaining 15-20% change where the initial became what was prior to the new additional controls. And final became the new additional controls. So I think you need to define this clearly in your procedure so that people don't get confused, and give illustrative examples. Give them clearly, hey, this is how it might work in a certain situation. And for even a legacy product, you do changes all the time. So you'll add line items. And in fact, you'll be able to show, like Bijan is saying, version 1, version 1.1, 1.2. You can walk the auditor through these revisions if they insist and say, we have a continually updating process. I don't think we should try to imagine quote unquote no control pre-mitigation scenario for a product which is already kind of evaluated completely, right? So I hope that will help in providing that context, Ronak. I think if you make the templates too rigid and don't provide illustrative examples, people are going to get confused, and then you will have more questions, and it won't be very effective for you.
Comment, Naveen. So I had worked on establishing a risk management file for an existing product which is already in market. It was very challenging, like Tom pointed out. It is very hard to make the engineers think without the controls. Usually they end up thinking there's no risk because we already have controls in place. But I had to make them think that there is no controls in place and implement the risk control measures and show the reduction. The way it helped us out was because, like, in situations where there are non-conformances and complaints, now you know that the risk control measure that you have placed has failed. So then, to make lot release determinations in non-conformances, you need to show what's the initial risk, and if it's okay to move on. And that's how it was very helpful. For example, if it was a contamination bioburden result failed, you obviously started with a high risk initially, so you cannot release the product. But if it's a minor, non-critical dimensional failure, which does not impact the product safety, then your initial risk to start with was low. Acceptable. And even if this fails, then it helps in sort of making the justification.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So what I would say to that is, make sure you are outlining your assumptions clearly, because what you don't want is kind of an arbitrary assignment of probability of harm and severity, because you are thinking that, hey, this is absolutely no controls at all. So if you wanted to apply that approach, the recommendation would be at least outline your assumptions clearly so that everybody knows how that estimation is made. Great. Anybody else who wants to add to it? Go ahead, Erin.
I have a question along the lines of risk control measures and pre and post. I mean, when you have a scenario where your risk control measure is what fails, so an alarm, for example, is what you're using to reduce the risk, and that fails. How do you assess the risk of that situation without kind of having an understanding of what the risk was prior to the implementation of that risk control measure? Or does that potential need to be assessed on its own in a totally separate kind of risk ID or line item or however you want to refer to it. Because a lot of times that is the failure of the risk control measure. And is that the same risk that you started with, or is that a different risk?
Got it. I understand. Good point. So this is probably an event, right? An event happened where the risk, you are saying risk control measure that we implemented has failed. This is an event. So I would say you have to analyze that event, how that specific event relates to all other sequence of events that might be related to hazardous situations and harms. And there are tools you could use to really see the impact of that individual event on the overall probability of occurrence. Because this single event is a contributor for sure, but it's not the only contributor. Mm-hmm. So you need to and I know Bijan probably has a lot more specific tailored answer to that. I would say you need to evaluate each event on its own by understanding its relationship with other events to the overall hazardous situation and harm combination you are trying to evaluate. And if a single failure can lead to a significant change in the probability of harm, yes, you will say, is post-mitigation control has failed. I need my post-mitigation new revised probability is not what I had before. Mm-hmm. So it'll still be post-mitigation because you had a control before. So yeah, again, that's the way I would handle it. But I think where people struggle is that they try to relate single events to eventual hazardous situation and harm. They try to just extrapolate from a single occurrence of an event to the hazardous situation, whereas a specific hazardous situation actually is a result of a combination and a sequence of events, which may involve this specific event in a certain way. And if the relationship says that this event is the dominant event, yes, then the overall probability will change significantly. Otherwise, maybe not. So any comments, guys? Any other discussion to that? Bijan, anybody else?
Aaron, if I understand you right, you have a device that, say, presents a hazard, and then you have a risk control, which is like an alarm, and you're saying, what if the alarm fails? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the alarm is information for safety in this case, and it actually doesn't reduce the risk because the risk is the failure in the device that has presented the hazard. The alarm is expecting the user, you're providing information to the user, I think, right? That's saying, don't use the device or take some corrective action. Am I right on that?
Well, interesting. So an alarm that may sound during therapy to alert the user of a condition or a failure, would you consider that information for safety and not a protective measure?
Yes, a distinction. Well, it depends. The definition of information for safety is when you provide information to a user and expect action. Is your alarm expecting action from the user, like not using the device or changing a filter or doing something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it is information for safety. A protective measure does not expect action. A protective measure, a good example of that is a cap on a hypodermic needle. Mm-hmm. You're not teaching them to do anything. The device just comes with a protection. So the alarm, even though it's kind of maybe non-intuitive, but alarm is providing information and expecting action. So it's information for safety. And you're saying, well, what if my alarm failed? The alarm failure did not create the hazard. The device itself created the hazard. So
or user error or something created the hazard.
Like that, right? So and the same question can be asked of really any kind of protective measures or information for safety. Is that a hazard happens, my P1 is the probability of occurrence of the hazardous situation, and then now I'm going to take some corrective actions, like providing alarms or whatever, IFU and training to reduce the risk. Well, what if the alarm failed? That's now a secondary thing. The first thing that happened was the failure of the device. Now this is the second thing that has to happen, which is the failure of the alarm. And so you're considering a situation of dual failures in this case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then you are also thinking about what you are anticipating the user to do, and if they fail to take action, then hazardous situation occurs.
Right. Imagine if the alarm didn't fail, but the user still didn't take action.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Same thing.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
I think the struggle here is that we typically have not built the entire sequence of events in all different scenarios. It's in our mind. I know that. And sometimes we just go from point A to point B directly without going through this sequence of events and understanding how they are linked with each other. That's what I kind of try to emphasize to people is,
It doesn't seem to be, well, in my experience, it doesn't seem that the effort has been made to define how much each factor in a sequence of events contributes to the overall,
yes,
P1 or P2.
Yes.
And without that, if you're trying to assess the risk of a failure of a risk control measure for an HHE, for example, how do you quantify that? How do you quantify? Because it is multiple faults. It is various failures either on the part of the user, the device, the control measure. So how do you quantify the absence of that one risk control measure in terms of the overall risk to the patient? And it just seems like it's not most likely, or at least in risk assessments I've seen, it's not clearly defined how much that one element really contributes to the overall POH.
It's the relationship that matters, and this is where I'm going to put a plug to Bijan's book, because I know he has given illustrations. He has used examples of how you would build these relationships and events. So that is upfront work you should expect your engineers to do along in collaboration with medical experts like you to be able to relate those. And once you have those relationships, then you can go back to your initial estimated numbers and you can say how those numbers have changed now because of this event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or do we have confidence that, hey, this is just like a one-off special cause or something that we need to kind of figure out over a period of time and have other protective measures in place? So that you are right. That work typically we have not done in our development process. We do FMEAs and we do single fault analysis and we just leave it at that. And we try to link a single failure or a fault or a failure mode to an eventual outcome. And we always find this difficulty evaluating. I'm actually working on a project right now that addresses the same issue. They're trying to look at the post-market data and figure out if the risk level has changed or not, because they think they have a signal. But using FMEAs, they cannot go back and link to hey, everything is running fine. We have no non-conformances, product is in spec, so we cannot do anything about it. And that tells me that the risk management process is not effective. It's not working for them effectively. Good discussion again, guys. Really appreciate. This is a real world problem. So what we discussed today is happening all the time. Anybody else has any thoughts or comments on this? Okay. If not, I want to make sure that we address Manoj's question. Erin, I do have your question too, and we will handle that as well about your end of life question you submitted. So let me do this. Share my screen, and I'm actually gonna go. I had some stuff here, but let's look at this one. So Manoj, can you see my screen here? No, not yet. Here. Okay. How about now? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Manoj, is this the question you submitted, right?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about it to the group? Maybe you present it and all of us understand exactly what you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm looking for this PMCF plan, because PMCF plan, we have a template regarding the MDCG guidance document. They have given some information about how you are going to conduct your PMCF data. So whether we need to conduct any clinical study, particularly for any product, for any device which have been in the market from the last 20 years or more than that, or it is only sufficient to collect the patient feedback and physician feedback and literature from some other medical devices, means similar type of medical devices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think so what you're saying is that we have a lot of market experience.
Yes.
Do we have to do a clinical study, for example? So I think if you look at EU MDR, they're expecting your PMCF process to be a continual process, right? It should be a continual process. They're not mandating you must do X or Y, you define. But let's take the big picture in mind. The big picture is you have to continually show a favorable benefit risk, correct?
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if your device has been in the market for 2 months or 20 years. If after 20 years you realize state of art has changed. Maybe your complaints data is showing something else, and the benefit risk is actually not that favorable anymore. And the only way you can demonstrate is through proactive, maybe a clinical study. I don't know. That's a decision you'll have to make. And that's on a practical basis, what I would say is that EUMDR, anything related to that, you should consult with your notified body, because they are, at the end of the day, the ones who are making an assessment. So what you decide to do should be in the context of how strong a case you can make for a continued favorable benefit risk. That would be my answer to that. But again, I open the discussion, and others may have additional feedback for you.
Naveen, one more thing I want on. You raised one issue like benefit and risk. See, as per ISO 24971, benefit risk analysis is going when there is a residual risk which is not at all mitigated by a risk mitigation process. You cannot go with all type of risks against benefits.
Well, so you are also responsible for overall benefit risk as well, correct?
Yes.
I think that's the basis of the regulatory approval.
Yeah, exactly. See, here the question is, PMCF, if you consider as per the EU MDR, it is going to require for all type of devices. But you can consider the medical devices are unique type of products, not like pharmaceuticals. Every device having this own state-of-art technologies, which is going to update it every year, but it is not possible to update your documentation for every year, because it will incur a lot of investment by the small scale industries especially, and it may not be possible if all the companies is doing the PMCF study for all type of for their device. Suppose there is a product, you can say some XYZ is a product, and number of manufacturers, like 100 manufacturers around the globe manufacturing the same type of product, getting the raw materials from the almost 3 to 4 raw materials only. There is no specific technology involved in manufacturing a medical device, something like a bone wax.
No, so I think the one point of confusion, let's get over that, is not the PMCF does not automatically mean a clinical trial. Okay,
yeah, it is not a clinical trial, actually clinical study, like you are going to
or a clinical study. It does not automatically mean that you will enroll patients and do a study. What it means is that you should have a plan which is consistent or which is related to the residual risk that you perceive. And the data shows if the residual risk is still high and the benefit risk is no longer favorable, you might have to do a lot more work than just gathering literature and reviewing that information. If it continues to stay good, then you're fine. You can say we're going to just do. So PMCF does not necessarily imply, in my mind, a clinical study. Others may have other comments on that, I hope.
Yeah, you're right, Naveen. Yeah, it really is what the word says, is clinical follow-up. It doesn't mean necessarily a clinical study. It could be collecting of information, could be even, let's say, for example, from a registry, from your clinicians. You just want to make sure your device is still performing as you expected it, but the benefit risk ratio is still valid. And you do it for as long as the product is in the market.
And Abdul, you made a comment about burdensome changes or updating of documents. And that is definitely a challenge for everybody in our industry. I say two things about that. One is, take a look at your document structure. Do you have complexity inherently by design in your documentation structure that actually forces you to do more work than necessary? Second is, you can always define an update calendar depending on your perceived risk of different things. And you can say, we understand we must change our documentation based on the actions we have taken, but this is going to be our calendar. As long as you have a track, and I have worked with big companies where you have hundreds of files that need to be updated on a monthly basis. They'll have to hire an army of people to do that. Nobody says that you must have everything updated on day one after the change. As long as you have a plan in place and action is being taken, that is sufficient to show your intent to update the documents overall. And I think I'm going to look at someone like Tom, who has enormous experience evaluating stuff like that to help us understand what would be an expectation from a document update point of view.
I could not have said it any better, Naveen. I mean, you nailed it. No one expects the switch to be flipped. No one expects, instantaneous change. But if you don't have a plan,
yes,
how do you defend that? And worse, if you have a plan but you're not executing.
Yes, that's even.
But it's one of those things that it is, a lot of gray areas and a lot of fuzzy. This is not one of those. This is pretty straightforward. If you have a pragmatic approach and a reasonable approach that's defendable, that's all you can do, and that's regulators are going to accept that all day long, providing you haven't crossed that 3-year threshold or something where now we're saying, hey, thou shalt.
Thou shalt, yeah. So, and again, have a risk-based approach to document updating too, right? If there's a document that is used almost on a daily basis to make decisions that affect benefit risk, you must change that, you must update that quicker than other documents, right? So I know we are so what I'm trying to say is that that's a process problem, not a standards or regulation problem. It's a business process problem within our organization to have effective utilization of their resources. Everyone is resource strained, I know that. Nobody is going to say I have more than enough resources. But do you have a business process that allows efficient use of those resources is the key question you have to ask. Abdul, does that answer some of the questions you had about this topic?
Yes. Actually, my concern was like with every change, the same risk file is being updated multiple times within a month, and that's adding a lot of work to my schedule.
Yes.
So that's where I was like, is it okay to say that every 30th of month we'll review all the changes and then.
I won't advise you to have like a fixed schedule because you're gonna do the same thing over and over again. It should be risk based. You're gonna define a frequency of update based on risk and during the time frame, risk of the document, risk related to the misuse of the document. Think about it that way. If the document was not updated and people misused it, then is the risk high for the product. That should be done much quicker than others. I wouldn't say third Monday of every month or every third month, because then you're creating a fixed schedule for you. That would be a problem. Because eventually things will pile up. Your queue will actually pile up. You need to do a risk-based approach, but have a log of that. Have someone responsible for that and have a measurement around how effectively we are executing that plan. If it's not working for us, we need to change that. So it's a business process question, not really a, I would say, regulatory question or question of standards.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we have been doing informally, because we can't update the document for every small change. So whenever the change is big enough, so it's affecting something with high risk, or moving something from high risk to acceptable risk, that's when we initiate the FMEA update.
Great.
Include other changes as well with that update. But I
Great.
think analyzing that in the procedure is not an issue.
Yep. Okay. So, all right. I want to actually go to a question, Aaron, that you asked on our discussion forum. And I know, Bijan, you contributed to it significantly. But let's open it up. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, Aaron, again, I'll invite you. I put down all the information you had submitted, but I invite you to kind of speak to it. If you have additional question around this or anything else you want to ask.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, there are lots of questions about this idea of, beyond service life. Obviously we have simple devices that have a shelf life, disposables and things like that. But when it's a durable kind of electronic device, something that's used over many years, and ultimately it reaches the defined service life, kind of what are the obligations or what are the experiences of others as far as what are the obligations to either mandate that it be taken out of service, recommend that it be taken out of service, what are the obligations if it is continued to be used after that service life in terms of risk management. So it's kind of a general topic, but it just seems like I think we know that there are probably people, and I think Bijan had said this in his response to my question, that are choosing to go ahead and continue to use a device beyond service life because of whatever their resources may be. But then it becomes what is the obligation of the manufacturer in those cases?
That's right. And you're thinking reportability, I assume?
Reportability, risk assessments, and even field actions. If of course, you're seeing a trend of failures, but the device is beyond its service life. So, what types of obligations might there be, even in terms of further notifications to the field and field actions and things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, could be a struggle for a lot of folks. Anybody has any thoughts on this?
A little bit, yeah. If we know that a medical device is going to become unsafe after it's past its lifetime and people are still using it, and also it requires that we know who those people are that are still using it, we are supposed to notify them to stop using the device. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the devices don't become unsafe, but we just don't have data to prove that they are still safe. Mm-hmm. We have some capital equipment at Medtronic that are repairable, but people keep repairing them and keep using them, and just like decades, long time after their expected lifetime, but the devices are just very good. They just keep lasting.
Yes.
I don't really know how to, we can't go get it, pull it out of their shops. We can't go to the clinic and say, you can't use this anymore because it's still working, but we just didn't collect data. So that's why I'm not really sure how to handle when a device is not unsafe, it's beyond its design life and people are still using it. We can probably just only warn them that you're now beyond the expected lifetime of the device and we recommend that you replace it. One comment one of my colleagues one time said is that we can offer to replace the device, give them a new copy. Mm-hmm. Because some of our devices were designed 30 years ago. So we have newer designs and we can tell them, hey, the device you're using is really old. We have a new version. How about replacing it with this new one?
It's a great thought. And then I also think about, it's not just a hardware issue. It could also be a software issue. Right? You might have software going and that's what I would worry about more now than a hardware problem, because the software may not be even available anymore or may not be compatible with other softwares they are using, may have more vulnerabilities that actually create more unsafe scenarios for patients. And in those scenarios, how do you go back to them and say, hey, this device that you're using is no longer going to be cannot be used with the new version of the software we have made. So, and we are not going to support it. So I think this is probably a very, very good topic for further discussion, in terms of the regulatory expectations, mm-hmm. right? What are the requirements from the FDA? And this might require you to actually consult with them a little bit more frequently and say, hey, we have a scenario, we have issued warnings to them, here is the data we are collecting, and we have no strong signal of, that these are unsafe, but we are concerned that they may become unsafe. So what should we be doing? What is our obligation? So I have a feeling a lot of things could be case by case. I don't think you can have a, standard rule or guidance on it.
In those cases, we can probably benefit from the models of common consumer electronics like iPhones, for example. They stop supporting certain, even actually Windows, they stop supporting certain old versions. They tell people, look, after this date, this product is no longer supported. And sometimes companies can actually command the device to stop working. In fact, I just read an article this morning about 4 models of not iPhones, but smartphones made by different companies that they said on September 17th, your devices will stop working. We'll just kind of send in a signal to the device, the device will stop working. That's one way of handling it. And if you can't make it stop working, and if telling them that we're going to stop supporting the software, then it's the same model as the hardware. That they can say, well, I like the old software.
Yeah, I like the old software.
I want to keep using it. One of my colleagues was telling me that he was still using Windows 7. I don't know how he managed to do it. I mean, that's a long time ago. And he finally changed it, I think, last week. He moved up to the current version of Windows. Yeah. So sometimes you can't make people change.
No, you
touched
can't.
on it.
Go ahead, Tom.
You touched on it a little bit, Naveen and Aaron. Isn't it funny that we have to have these conversations?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, human dynamics, the world we live in. It is what it is. But it's interesting insofar as we've had some successes across industry with trying to do something about reprocessing multi-use devices, single-use devices, and where there have been some pretty amazing innovations to help with that. A pandemic situation. I have to come up with a different word. A global issue with using single-use devices over and over and over again. And because we've had some luck there, the agency had made comments, and this is some years ago now, but expecting that we kind of apply that same philosophy and innovation. It isn't practical on all the cases. Sometimes we can, and sometimes we can. Kind of what you touched on there, Bijan. We can terminate it, shut it down. You just won't use it past this time. But that's the exception to the rule. Mm-hmm. The rule is it's out there. It still has our name on it, and like it or not, we're responsible for it. Mm-hmm. And that's a terrible answer, but that is the case. And thankfully, it doesn't rear its head too often. But ultimately, while it has its name on it, regardless of all the notifications and things we've sent out that it's over, it's retired, it's done, it's reached end of life, and oh, by the way, we'll send you a new one. We're still accountable to the agencies for that.
So, a question here, very quick question: Have you guys seen examples and procedures where you would say the level of effort you have to make after end of life with a certain customer or place where the device is used, level of effort you have to make to inform them, to warn them? After that, you're not I give you the example of complaints, right? Typically, you have to call at least 3 times to show that you did your effort to collect the information back. Is there something like that could be done to demonstrate your due diligence in terms of the level of effort you are supposed to make? And then it becomes more of a question of, because they're also a business. You are not the only business. They're also a business. They also have responsibilities and liabilities and other requirements. So where does that line end? Your responsibility as a manufacturer and the level of effort that you should demonstrate versus some other business. Does that make sense?
Yes,
right,
I haven't seen a prescription like that.
I'm wondering, even the strength of whatever your notification is there some criteria for the strength of your wording,
Yeah.
Stop use in all caps versus, yes. This may not be serviceable anymore, but kind of leaving it open to, you can do what you want. If you can figure out a way to fix it, go ahead, versus stop use. I mean, that's,
Aaron,
I'm sure the legal department can come up with the right language. I'm sure of that.
One of my colleagues was saying we should send cease and desist letters to customers.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So great, guys. I know, time flies when we meet. You're almost at the end. I just want to pause here for a couple of minutes and again, open the floor for any discussion, feedback, comments, anything people might have, particularly those who we didn't hear too much from. Go ahead and, let us know what you guys thinking and feeling about. Okay, we have some silence. So in that case, okay, anybody?
So Naveen, I was a first time and certainly will be back, but interesting conversations, always great conversations, but looking forward to more of them.
Perfect, Tom. Thank you for that. Yeah, and our intent here really is to have a conversation and a dialogue. We definitely are not, our intention is not to say, hey, this is the answer. And because we want people to feel like we can discuss our real world problems and nobody has a black and white solution, but at least it gives us some thoughts, some thinking to do.
Yeah, not here to legislate, but to share what our perspectives are and maybe some experiences.
Okay. So I will definitely pitch to you guys, engage in the discussion forum. We have set it up and we have actually a lot of people who have joined. And I hope you're beginning to see the value of that in terms of driving conversation. So really invite you to check it out, engage often, post often. I know it's probably not the perfect platform yet. And again, I'm trying to solve that problem behind the scenes, but that's the solution I have so far. In the future, you can expect a little bit more better platform that will allow us to do more interaction. And I also want to be mindful of how busy we are. So it's just do whatever you can. Let me know if you find technical problems. For example, you're not getting notified, or you post your question or comment and you never heard back at all, right? Something happened. Is it even there? Those are the things I would like to hear, because we may have to make a decision about going to a different technical platform as well. So, but go, please take advantage of that, because now I think we believe we have over 50 people who have joined that discussion forum. So the community is growing, and we want to keep it tight and closed so that we find it beneficial to us. Okay. Anything else? Any last minute comments, thoughts?
I suppose, Orla here. So the big thing for me was with regards to the alarm, because I know within our product, we do have an alarm. And up until recently, we have been identifying it as a risk control measure. Mm-hmm. But it's nice to know that it's considered as a protective measure for safety. Mm-hmm. So at least that's something I can bring back to the team as well, just to be, I suppose, conscious of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, in some scenarios, so you might have to take a look at the function of that protective measure versus information for safety, the way Bijan outlined or clarified. So yes, but great. I'm glad that you were able to pick up on a practical tip you can take back, and that's exactly the intent of this. Anybody else? Any thoughts, comments? Okay, well, if not, then thank you again, everybody, for joining, and enjoy the rest of the day. Have a good weekend. We will see you soon.